Our next speaker is one of your favorites, one of my favorites, someone who's been in the Wisconsin legislature, he's run for Congress, he's constantly in the forefront of the progressive movement. His name is Stan Gruszynski, and he now has a new position. He's President Obama's head of the USDA Rural Development State Director for the state of Wisconsin. So he was appointed by the President. We're very proud of Stan Gruszynski. Very few people I know as much about agriculture as he does. Please welcome Stan Gruszynski.
Last year I spoke in the morning. I'm happy to be speaking in the afternoon because it's my understanding that your morning speakers were exceptional. Therefore, it takes the pressure off me. And I don't deal with pressure very well. Just ask my kids. At any rate, I don't know why this place does it to me, but I always think about the farm when I come here, the place where I grew up. And just when I was thinking it's a pretty hot day, you know, I'm even a little too hot for this sort of stuff, I realized that if I were back in the real world of my youth, I would be sitting on a combine on a day like this, operating it if I was 12 or older, or helping my dad if I was younger, and there'd be nothing but oat dust swirling around me. Recreation for later in the day would be getting off the combine, putting the equipment away, and spending the evening seeing how much black stuff you could spit that you had managed to take into your lungs or your nose or wherever else it managed to lodge itself. Now, for those of you who are part of city life, you kind of wouldn't appreciate that, but just deal with it, I say. So. At any rate, I'd like to thank Ed Garvey and the Fighting Bob organization for inviting me to once again be a part of this event and giving me an opportunity to share with you a little bit of my local take on, I guess you could say, local take on what's happening, and to validate and confirm the importance of this event and the importance of your being here. I don't think folks often realize just how important coming together and being together and talking with one another is in terms of nurturing kind of the spirit and the soul and kind of preparing us for citizenship. So that's really the reason that I think most of us come here, even though the entertainment's good and Ed can be funny and those sorts of things. And I want to thank Ed, incidentally, for mentioning this whole thing about being the appointment as Director of Rural Development for the state of Wisconsin. It is an assignment that I'm really eager to work at and carry out, having grown up and lived in practically all of my life in rural Wisconsin. I feel ready for this. And it's a mission that I want to lead with my heart and with the passion that I feel for the rural life that I know and many of you know and are familiar with, and is so much a part of Wisconsin tradition, economics, and livelihood. You know, every year the Congress appropriates billions of dollars to assist rural America. Much of it you're probably unaware of. It's money to build and support water and waste systems in small communities. It's small business development and expansion. It encourages women and minorities in rural areas to get into business and be self-supporting. We support and build and contribute to senior centers and clinics and schools and village halls, low and moderate income housing, telecommunications, and now broadband for rural Wisconsin so that it can be competitive. But in spite of this, as many of you also know, our rural communities continue to struggle and decline in the face of the changes that are taking place in the world and that affect all of us. Now, what inspires me about this new assignment, and as many of you know from past speeches, I can have my cynical moments, but as of right now, I'm inspired, is the commitment I have seen in this administration to do more than just provide federal dollars and push them out the door in Washington. They have charged us with taking real action to build community in rural communities. Now, I've just returned a little over a week ago from a week-long policy meeting in Washington where I heard Tom Vilsack, the Secretary of Agriculture, and in the past, Secretaries of Agriculture paid very little attention to the money in the rural development sector. But this secretary is committed to it. And he told us that in every day and in every way, we should ensure that rural communities are creating wealth, that they're self-sustaining, that they're repopulating, and they're thriving economically. Now that's going to be a big charge, especially during these sorts of times. But what inspires me is not only the commitment of the administration in terms of resources, but their understanding that resources are not enough. They know that a healthy community is a community that believes in itself. It is a community with hope, with vision, with a knowledge of what it takes to sustain itself. It is a community that understands that neighboring communities are resources, not competition. That all who live and commit to the community are assets, regardless of economic means, what you do for a living, the color of your skin, or your country of origin. This administration knows this and believes this, even in the face of their critics and the cynics. This is why we have put out a call for citizen engagement and support of the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act. It's not enough to wait and hope, if you live in a rural community, that the money will come to you. We believe that communities must organize, look to what their needs are, ask for it, and build. When the money is spent, we will have failed if people living in rural communities, or urban communities for that matter, do not take ownership of their future and the commonwealth. Now here's where it gets interesting for me, and I'll kind of get off my script. I know how cynical people can be. Like I mentioned earlier, from time to time I've been a bit of a cynic myself. I know that we've created a culture and a mindset in this country that our problems can be blamed on someone else. We have been spoon-fed on a daily basis on a pablum of misinformation, divisive rhetoric, and simple solutions that obfuscate the fact that we each have a responsibility and an obligation to create and sustain our own future and the futures of our friends and our neighbors and our families. What is ironic is the opposition of this effort calls it un-American when in fact working together and cooperation and supporting what we do is a part of the American way, always has been. It is what this country is all about. Often I talk with people about things of this nature, and the response that I get is, well, Stan, this is easier for you. You've been in government and you understand it. You care about these things, so you move on them. You move in circles where people talk about this, so you understand it. And they say to me, there's not much we can do because it's so out of control that it's useless for me to get involved. And when you look at it, you want to kind of say, well, I know you're right, because we have wars where and when we don't want them. We have regulatory organizations that have failed us. We have the greatest disparity between the rich and the poor in the history of this nation. And there's a general sense that our government is in the control of individuals and entities that do not represent the public interest. And my concern, aside from the fact that there's that much cynicism, that much discord, and that much unwillingness to act, is that there also seems to be a growing sense that the responsibility for changing that is the singular responsibility of this president at this time, and that is not the case. And we must each understand that as citizens. What we're talking about here is taking control. And to that end, I want to tell you a story. This is a farm story, and it's a true story. When I was a kid, because we had a small dairy farm, and I'll try not to repeat the cows are in the corn story, that's a different story for a different time. Well, one of my jobs when I hit the age of about 10, because my dad was a grazer, in other words, our small dairy farm relied on putting the cows out to pasture every day and then moving the pasture a little bit at a time so that they would have new grass, the best feed for the highest production. Now, my dad didn't want to waste time. See, some people understand this. My dad didn't want to waste time doing that himself. He had bigger things to do. So as soon as we were old enough, we were assigned the responsibility to move that electric fence line. It swung on a pivot post, and you'd maybe move it 100 yards, create a pie-shaped piece, and that was the feed for this small herd on, say, maybe a half of a 40 for that day, and each day it took place. Well, when you're a kid, you're always looking for ways to, well, have shortcuts. You know, get the job done just a little bit quicker. So one time, as I went out there, sort of on a day like this, and I saw those Holsteins laying over under the shade tree over there, and they didn't look like they were all that interested in feed, so I thought rather than take the time to drive them back into the barnyard, as it was called, pasture, small pasture, and lock them in, I decided to move the fence all by myself. And assuming that I could get the posts up, the wire over post back in, the clips on and out of there before they realized they were getting new grass and came into the pasture. Well, in a word, it didn't work. I was about halfway through the process. Little kid, 12 years old, tugging that wire over that alfalfa. It wasn't moving very well. I had to drop it on occasion, run out there, pick it up, haul it in. And Patsy and Belle, they were kind of the lead cows, they knew something was up. If I was walking in the alfalfa, they could be walking in the alfalfa. So, as I say, I didn't lock them in the barnyard, which was in cow language sort of like the Securities and Exchange Commission. You put them there to kind of keep control over things so things wouldn't get out of control. So at any rate, the next thing I know, they're in the alfalfa, they're running through the fence, the wire is being either broken or dragged further out. They're all acting like it's a feeding frenzy and they're crazy. And I realized that, yes, this thing has spun out of control. It's impossible for me to deal with this. And I went running home to my father and anyone else that would listen, crying and, wailing about the fact that this whole thing had happened to me. My dad just quietly put down his things and he walked out with me back out to the pasture. He directed things. Let's get them out of here. No, you're going to need a longer switch than that. All right, let's move them. We got the cows out. We got the fence up. We got the job done. We came back in. And then he said to me, do you know what happened there? And I said, well, it just got out of control. He said, was it really out of control, or did you let it get out of control? Now I thought to myself, how could he say that? My face is beet red. My feet are all picked up from running through the hay. I'm sweaty, I'm wet, I'm hot. I did everything I could do to not have this happen. And then he took me aside and he said, except think about the fact that it could happen. That's what you didn't do. You didn't anticipate that things can happen if you fail to take certain sorts of actions, and that there is a consequence for that behavior. You rolled the dice, you took the risk, you let it go, you assumed it would be all right, and then you acknowledged that it was out of control without ever taking responsibility for the fact that you gave up control. Then he went on to explain a little bit how operating a farm wasn't just pasturing animals or fixing machinery or paying the bills or all the other things, bringing in the crops that went with it. He explained to me that farms are about having a larger perspective, understanding how things work, anticipating and thinking and engaging. Now, he didn't speak quite as prosaically as I do about all of these sorts of things, mind you. But I was listening very closely, and I realized that there was a point to what he was saying. And it was sort of my epiphany or aha or whatever it is for observations I make in life about when things seem to be out of control. And I think that that experience on the farm applies to citizenship. Much of what we've lost has not been taken from us. We have given it up. We have let things get out of control. For fear of standing out, we've stood silent, giving up civil liberties and tolerating discriminating policies and unequal treatment under the law. For fear of standing out, for fear of being called liberals, we've ignored tax injustice, a failing health care system, reduced support for education and training, and a well-maintained infrastructure. For fear of being called unpatriotic, we've allowed our leaders to put our military men and women in harm's way and given up the protections that are provided in the Bill of Rights. Those are our choices. It is control that we have given up. Now it's time, I believe, for each of us to achieve and acknowledge the control we have given up and to control our lives and our country through involvement and engagement. As citizens, it is our responsibility. Now, people say to me again, well, I just can't do it. I'm a common person. What can I really do? How can I really make a difference about these sorts of things? Well, in my mind, Nelson Mandela was at some point in his life a common person. Uncommon only in his unwillingness to give up control, even from a prison cell. Rosa Parks, a common person, tired, literally, of giving up control, to someone else's bias. Harvey Milk, unwilling to give up control and settle for discrimination. Granny D, who walks this country to try to impress on people the importance of not giving up control. All of these very common people. Cesar Chavez, who dedicated his life to farm workers and earning for them the right to control their own lives. Even here in Wisconsin, when I was a young man, I knew very little about our Native American tribes. No one taught us up in Marinette County about Native American tribes in our schools that I recall. And so when assimilation was taking place and it was part of a national policy, Ada Deer stood up as a Menominee and said, we won't have this assimilation take place. And she fought to bring reservation status back to the Menominees. She did not give up control, even in the face of a powerful nation that wanted it that way. Tom Malson, I don't know if any of you remember him. I was in the legislature. It was by his leadership and courage, asserting Chippewa spearing rights in lakes in northern Wisconsin. He went to landing sites and spearing sites that law enforcement said may well be out of control in terms of the hostility. A common citizen asserting his rights and showing leadership. Midge Miller, whom I truly miss, who would be at this event today. A mother, a common person, a Wisconsinite, someone who mentored me and many others along the way, who decided to make it her life's work to make sure that people understood when those who would be adverse to our sorts of democratic government were attempting to take away our control and our say over those things. Even locally, if you think about it, what happened to Tom Barrett in Milwaukee This wasn't a policy meeting he was at. He was walking in his neighborhood. And he could have easily turned away from that crisis, but he would not give up control in his neighborhood. That's what I am talking about. And that's something that we each need to do as we sort of move forward from here and decide how we're going to support this administration and the change that we need in this country. The other night, our president spoke to the issue of health care reform. He referenced a letter from the late Senator Ted Kennedy as he appealed to the better nature of our leaders to get beyond the partisanship and act on health care reform. The president spoke of the moral obligation, but he also spoke of the admonition by Senator Kennedy that the action on health care would determine the character of this nation. Building the character of the nation is a responsibility that belongs to all of us. So rise to this cause of citizenship, I ask you. Do not give up control. Let us together build the commonwealth. Help candidates, volunteer in your community, run for office, write a letter, advocate, but do not give up control. Thank you very much.